Well, I'm going to introduce to you a man who really doesn't need any introduction. You know him really well. He graduated from West Point. He is a former Army Ranger. He served as an international diplomat and now is the superintendent of Harrison School District. And this is a man who recognizes the value of habeas corpus, and he knows when torture is torture. And so I'd like to introduce to you all Mike Miles.
Thank you. It's good to see you again. Just a brief background or catch up on my life. You probably know that I have 3 kids, and some of you have asked about them. Thank you for asking. Nichols is 11th grader. Madeline is a 10th grader. So we're trying to build up our savings again to get them into college after ruining my savings the last run. And then the little one is now 6 years old. Can you believe that? He's smart as a whip, reading really well. He's in 1st grade. He's reading about the 5th grade level. But he really is a 6-year-old. For Halloween, his mom and he went to Target to get a costume. And they found the scary one. He liked it. And then he went home and he put it on and looked in the mirror and scared himself to death. So he wouldn't wear it for Halloween. So he's really bright, but he is 6. But you know, I think that's kind of an apt metaphor for what Bush and Cheney have done. I think they went and looked at some scary costumes and put it on, but instead of being scared to death, they actually liked the scariness of their costumes, and the rest of us have been scared to death ever since. We talked a lot about impeachment today and about the Constitution and restoring the Constitution. You have a couple of speakers that are following me who are experts at it and will give you their passionate arguments for impeachment. I want to talk about something a little bit different because I think impeachment is one thing, but if we're just talking about Bush or Cheney or a few other officials, I think it's too limiting because it's not so much about impeachment, but I think it's the system that has been broken. Several years ago, many in the audience who supported my campaign, we talked about a tipping point coming. We talked about that point at which where you add one more event, it leads to a series of irreversible events. That tipping point was not the invasion of Iraq, but it was the election of George Bush and the present Congress. And we have reached the tipping point, and it has happened. Just at the wrong time in history, also. At the time when we needed an engagement in the world, where we needed to engage the growing powers of China and Russia and to deal collectively, collaboratively with some of the issues in South Asia and in some other parts of the world, we as a nation elected George Bush and his administration. Just at the time when education has really reached its own tipping point, where there's a bifurcation into the haves and the have-nots, and the gap being larger and larger between them in an educational sense, we elected this administration. At the time when health care reached a tipping point, or was close to reaching a tipping point, where 50 million Americans are without health care, many more are underinsured, we elected this administration, and I could go on to talk about infrastructure needs, economic needs, several other things. But, you know, for all his faults and his administration's faults, this administration had a number of accomplices. So we would have to impeach not only Bush, but we would have to impeach a whole bunch of people. You know them, and I'll just mention a few. Congress is one. With an administration that has an approval rating less than 30%, and 70% of Americans think we have a wrong policy in Iraq, we have a Congress that is unwilling or unable, or both, to do anything about that over the last several years, even with the Democratic House and the Democratic-controlled Senate. There's something wrong with our system when the party, especially the Republican Party in this case, becomes an extension of the executive branch. That's a systemic problem. I'm not sure, I hope it will be different with the Democrats in the White House, but I'm not sure it will be. Other accomplices. A system that will not hold Halliburton or Blackwater or any of the merchants of war accountable. That's a broken system. There have been many ills from these groups, and yet no one has been being held accountable. And there's this notion that being a mercenary is okay. When I was an Army Ranger, we really looked down on soldiers of fortune. That's what we called them. Because they didn't have any rules of war. They didn't attend ethics classes or have those tough discussions that Army officers that I knew had about war and ethics and the rule of law and deadly force, all of those things. We had a colleague, a lieutenant, whose sole goal in life was to have hand-to-hand combat with an enemy, and he left the Ranger Battalion to go seek his fortune in Burma, and we despise that sort of attitude. But now in our country, it seems it's okay to be a mercenary, and that's what it is. Soldiers for hire used to be called mercenaries. Now they're called patriots. And I'm not sure that's a good thing for our system. Other accomplices. We have a society that almost ignores the growing power of the military-industrial complex. And I'm not sure, we've reached a tipping point there. There are now so many people who have jobs and stock options vested in this military-industrial complex, the one that Eisenhower warned of a long time ago. It is now much more powerful, and there are many accomplices there to support this administration. We can go further. The State Department, an institution that I still love, an institution that I really root for, but they put war over diplomacy 5 years ago. When I was working for the Bureau of Intelligence and Research, it's called INR in the State Department. That's a group of people who look at intelligence reports and they write the Secretary's Morning Summary. They analyze intelligence for the State Department. And when I was working there as an analyst, we had to corroborate everything. We would not dare to send anything forward to the Secretary of State without corroborating information or evidence from the CIA or other intelligence sources, and we worked closely together to make sure the information was right. And so when I saw at the time the intelligence community waving around a British white paper, which subsequently was found out to be taken off the internet, I already knew there was falsehoods and people who were just caving in and not doing their job, because I know how that intelligence community used to work. Companies like AT&T who have broken the law and trampled on our civil liberties and probably will not be held accountable for any of it. And make no mistake, it will come to light that money is involved. A news media that profits from dysfunction and conflict. Have any of you seen Lions for Lambs? I would recommend it to all of you. It's an excellent movie, and it wrestles with this question of how complicit the news media are. And then finally, I guess the biggest accomplice, and this is also a point made in the movie Lions for Lambs, is that all along the way, we had millions of Americans who didn't dig deep enough, who turned a blind eye, and substituted flag waving for the real hard work that patriotism really calls for. So in a way, we are all accomplices to this last administration and the failures of it and what has happened to our Constitution. I said we've reached a tipping point, and it may be decades before we can reverse and get back to at least the Constitution of the 1990s. No, we didn't have a perfect system then either, but at least it was more representative of and reflective of the principles of the Constitution. Well, what to do, right? That's always the question, what to do. Reminds me of Anthony, again, my 6-year-old. The other day, we were playing, and you know, sometimes we face, he and I, you know, aliens and monsters, and we have to eradicate them. And you know, I said, Anthony, how many are there out there? And he said that there's 1,000 of them out there. And I said, well, then all hope is lost. And he said, well, Dad, not all hope is lost. We can always run away. Really, I told you, he's a bright kid. But, you know, and when I think about our democracy, it would be nice if we could just run away from those things, but we can't. And I don't have any real nice, easy solutions for you. I think the two gentlemen that are going to follow me have better solutions, but I think two things have to be done. I think first, we have to elect, because we still have that process, and it can be a helpful one, to have a representative government. It is the best system still. We have to elect men and women of vision and courage. Vision so that you can assess the consequences of any action or inaction. Vision so that you can help guide us to a better country, a better state. Courage so that we will fight the fights that will need fighting, not just the fights we can win. Courage so that one won't be so busy trying to keep their job that they don't do their job. And issues are important. And you know, when I was running for U.S. Senate, I responded to a lot of surveys and had a lot of interviews with different groups and organizations, and they never asked me about courage and vision. I think issues are important, but no, not as important as a candidate's vision or courage. And so I think what we need to do is make that the key criteria for any candidate. What sort of vision have they had, do they have, and what kind of courage have they displayed? We had an opportunity back in 2002 where elected officials had an opportunity to show vision and courage. It didn't take much vision, by the way, to predict the things that were going to happen in Iraq and in that area, at that part of the world with an invasion. It didn't take much vision. It did take some courage. It would have taken some courage. But most of our elected officials showed neither. And I for one, and I'm not suggesting you do this, but I'm not voting for anybody who did not show vision or courage during that time. And, you know, I know some people say, well, you're gonna you know, cut off your nose to spite your face if we elect Republicans. Well, you know, in the short term, that may be true. But in the long term, you're not going to get a Congress that's going to stand up when things like that happen. So, such a critical issue in the future if we don't put a premium on vision and courage and hold people accountable who voted without vision and courage. And we have some elected officials in this state who are running for office, and I will not be supporting those who voted for the resolution to invade Iraq, because they either showed lack of vision, or if they could predict what was going to happen, they definitely showed lack of backbone and lack of courage. And I'm also not going to support those people who were silent, because that's the same thing. If you are silent on an issue of such importance, then I'm not sure you have the wherewithal to be in the Congress that needs to turn this country around and to recapture our Constitution. And I don't want to diss anybody in particular. But you know, You know, being all agitated and angry and outraged about Piñon Canyon and writing letters to the editors or something is fine. But if you're a senator or you're a U.S. congressman or woman, you need to be outraged and write letters to the editor and put forth bills about Iraq, about education and health care and the things that matter most. And that's what you get paid for, and that's what we send you to Washington to do. Not just focus on local issues. We've had no vision for this country, and that's part of the problem, either from senators or the president, and we've had no guiding principles. And so the first thing for folks there to do is set some guiding principles, and I just have a few for down the road, maybe 20 years from now, because I think it'll take some time. Number one, spend more in health care on a child's first 5 years of life than we spend on a person's last 5 years. Glad to get an applause from an older crowd on that one. Number two, spend more to educate a child than you do to imprison him. Number three, invest in the arts as much as you invest in sports. Number four, honor your diplomats and peacemakers as much as your soldiers. And number five, each generation leaves the earth environmentally better off than it received it. Wouldn't it be nice if those were true, or even close to true? But you have to have a vision of where you're going and what can be before we can even start to get there. And that's what's woefully missing with this administration. Let me end, because my time has run out, with the second thing I think we can do. And I really don't need to tell this group. Even though it's going to take maybe 20 years. I mean, at one point we had not reached the tipping point yet, but we have. And I think, unless some drastic event happens, it's going to take a long time to recover. And I don't know what a long time is, 10 years, 20 years, something like that, probably. So the second thing would be to do what you all are good at doing. And that is to stay engaged, stay involved, and do what you can in your corner of the world, of the state, to turn things around. To keep attending things like this, continuing to talk to your friends and families, vote responsibly, hold politicians accountable, because there will come a time when America will find its way again with your help. And it will be an America that speaks to our highest aspirations, that speaks to health care for everyone, a good education for everyone, operational transparency for our government, accountability. We will move forward together if you will just be the change you want to see in the world. Thanks for your time today. Thanks. Thank you, guys. And now for the main events of the evening, I have the pleasure of introducing two men who will be speaking to you tonight about impeachment and those issues about restoring our Constitution. I'll introduce them, one now and then one a little bit later. The first is John Nichols. John Nichols is an American journalist and author of The Genius of Impeachment, The Founder's Cure for Royalism. He's a media activist and political blogger. He's been a political correspondent for The Nation magazine. Actually, he is a political correspondent for The Nation magazine. He is a frequent guest on radio and television. He's a co-founder of Free Press, and he is working on a more competitive and public interest-oriented media system in our country, much needed. Please welcome John Nichols to the stage.